The Sunday Baroque podcast is made possible by WSHU and the Friends of Sunday Baroque. You can find out more about the Friends of Sunday Baroque and find out how to become one yourself by visiting our website, sundaybaroque.org, under the Contact tab. Violinist Rachel Podger is an expert in playing music from the Baroque and Classical music periods. Her long list of awards and accomplishments include being the first woman to be awarded the prestigious Royal Academy of Music Cone Foundation Bach Prize and being named Gramophone Artist of the Year in 2018. The British violinist is also founder and artistic director of Brecon Baroque Festival. Rachel Podger joins me on Zoom to talk about her life in music. Hello.
Hello. Oh, it's wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, you founded the Brecon Baroque Festival in Wales in 2006. How did you choose this location, and what are some of the special characteristics of the area?
Yeah, well, it's a lovely old Georgian town, and there was a festival there already, which had some musical elements, but it was mainly a kind of talk and walk and kind of look at the town, get to know the town kind of festival, and it was mainly kind of for locals. And there was actually, I just have to tell you about this very hilarious thing that used to happen during that festival. There was this race with a sedan chair, one of those old chairs that you have to, four people have to hold and that you have to run along with someone sitting inside. And so there was a race through the town, which is hilarious. And I unfortunately never witnessed this myself. But part of the race was they had to kind of stop at one point and get out of the sedan chair and butter themselves and put cream and jam on a particularly beautiful scone, and of course a Welsh cake, which are these kind of flat little cakes. If you've never had one, you have to try them. They're delicious. And they had to eat that as part of the race and then get back in the chair and then carry on. So it was that kind of festival, and it was very sweet, very attractive. And I was approached by one of the musicians involved in the festival, who I knew from working in London, a lovely oboist called Sophia McKenna. And she said, "Hey, Rachel, you're moving to the area. How about it? Do you want to get involved?" And so it came at a really good time. I mean, our children were really young. But actually, I was thinking, okay, it'd be quite nice to do something kind of in the local area rather than all the flitting around. I've been doing that for some years already, maybe 15 years or something, before I had kids. And I've met lots of other festivals and lots of promoters, of course, along the way, and you kind of see how festivals work and how they're kind of created, what the thoughts behind them, and you just learn along the way. You see so much, and you take kind of mental notes, and you see what works and what maybe doesn't work so well. And so I think I was kind of ready to embark on the adventure myself. So actually did it together with my partner at the time. And it worked out really well because he was teaching a lot of local kids and also young adults. So the last concert in the festival, and it has remained so, became this kind of jamboree of just bubbling fun, of a whole load of locals joining in. So we made up this kind of festival orchestra, Brecon Baroque Festival Orchestra, we called it. And so the modern instrument players, they tuned their instruments down to 415.
Wow.
And I handed out a whole load of Baroque bows and said, "Hey, try this. It's much easier to do string crossings and short notes and gesture and phrasing and stuff." And then a whole load of my current students and ex-students came along. So it became a lovely it kind of took on its own life in a way. It became a little community in itself, which was really joyful and very joyful. That's always the last concert. And that kind of developed right at the beginning of the festival. And then the other kind of slots of the festival, which have become just regular features of it, then developed over time. So we always have the first concert, the first main concert in the Cathedral, which is a very beautiful place in Brecon. If you're ever over in Wales, then you need to definitely, make sure that you fit that into your schedule. It's a very beautiful place and feels kind of sacred, it's just one of those sacred ancient sites. And so we have a vocal program always on the Friday night. This year it was Buxtehude Membra Jesu Nostri, which is the most beautiful piece. It's basically kind of 7 cantatas, and each cantata focuses on one part of the body of Christ. And of course the heart features, which has got the gambas. It's got 6 viola da gambas in that. It's just the most beautiful music. It's very, very stirring, it's very kind of meditative, it's very thought-provoking, but it's just exquisitely beautiful, I must say. And there's also feet and legs, and actually the part that I found most significant this time around was the knees, because Buxtehude instructs the string players to play with a kind of bow vibrato, like a kind of tremolo, kind of wah, 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 wah. He just writes the harmonies, he just writes them in kind of regular notes, and then he says, okay, you need to kind of do this tremolo in time. And you can just imagine the kind of shaking of the knees. It feels very physical, I
was going to say visceral, yeah.
It was very meaningful. So that's the Friday night is this kind of vocal program, and then on the Saturday night we kind of moved to the local theatre, which is basically a kind of a community theatre in the area. It has all the facilities that you need. It might not have the best sound, but we create a kind of Baroque atmosphere in there somehow with all of our instruments and a kind of nice backdrop. This year we had the backdrop of the town of Lübeck in the 17th century, because part of the theme was actually because we called it Walk with Bach, and we were focusing on the young Bach in 1705, when he walked from Arnstadt to Lübeck, which was a very long journey, like 300 miles, I think it was, or 250 miles. And it took him a long time, it took him like 3 weeks. And of course, he stayed there for some time. He overstayed. He got into trouble when he got back because he enjoyed his time there, because he went to visit Buxtehude. And then the program was all about, J.S. Bach was at the center of it. And then around him were all these other composers who either influenced him or who were related to him or who were students of his. So we had 2 of each. So we had 2 cousins, suite by 2 cousins, and then we had 2 of his kind of mentors. So the only non-Johann was Dietrich Buxtehude, but then there was Johann Kerl, whose music he would have copied out when he was a boy, when he was staying with his brother. There's that lovely kind of story of him getting up at night, and I remember having a reading book when I was a little girl about Bach. I think it was actually about famous composers, and there was one about Bach that I'd always stare at, and there was this really evocative image of him as a little boy sitting kind of on the floor, copying out old music, and you could see the kind of manuscript, and I was really kind of into that. I thought, wow, that looks so clever and so difficult to read. And then you'd see the kind of the moonlight coming in through the window, so you could tell that it was at night, And I remember thinking, that can't have been very good for his eyes, because I already knew at the time that he went blind,
Wow.
things you think about when you're little. So that picture is kind of, I don't know, that's kind of stayed with me, of him kind of copying out all this ancient wisdom from older composers. And so I thought we'd have a couple of them. And then we had pieces by 2 of his students, also Johanns. So Johann Gottlieb Goldberg of the famous Goldberg Variations, a very beautiful trio sonata, but very chromatic. It's like he was, actually it felt a little bit like he was trying very hard to be like his teacher. And then the other one was Johann Caspar, Johann Caspar Krebs, who was one of J.S. Bach's favorite students. And there's a little pun in there that Bach made. Apparently, he wrote in the letter to someone that Krebs, which means crayfish. Yeah, der Krebs ist der Beste in dem Bach. I might have to find the actual quote for you, so I can quote that proper. I just don't have the exact wording in my head right now. But basically, he's saying this crayfish is the best in my brook, because Bach means brook, right? And Krebs is crayfish. So that was his way of saying, he's my favorite.
Yeah. Well, he was very clever.
Yeah. So that was the program on the Saturday. And then, so I'm taking you right through the whole festival, but it's just, it's still completely, everything is still in my system. It's still in my head,
Sure.
And then on Sunday, we always have a kind of guest slot. So we had this fantastic group called the Society for Strange and Ancient Instruments.
Ooh.
And they brought a program which I reckon no one will ever have seen before. So there were 4 trumpet marinas.
Oh.
Now, that is an instrument. It's a very long, it looks a little bit like an Alp horn, and it rests on the floor, and you support it by putting it on your shoulder. And it's a kind of wooden box, but quite a narrow box. And it has 1 string, and there's a peg box at the top with 1 peg.
Uh-huh.
And you play it with the bow, and you change the pitch by basically just finding harmonics on the string.
Whew.
And it has a really kind of otherworldly sound to it.
Yeah.
And it's called trumpet marina, but it doesn't sound like a trumpet. You can tell it's a string instrument, but it's got a slightly funny kind of raspy sound. Mm-hmm. So it actually sounds a little bit like a brass instrument. It's so intriguing.
Now, wasn't Castrucci, wasn't he one that sort of used that instrument in some music? Yeah.
Yes, well, it was more widely used than we think. And apparently it was played by nuns who weren't allowed to play brass instruments.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know what the appeal particularly was of brass instruments, maybe to kind of, for the glory of God, because it's such a kind of joyful sound at festive times. And they weren't allowed to play these. Maybe it's a little uncouth.
Yeah.
So they resorted to playing these instruments, which sound a little bit like brass instruments. So that was a complete spectacle.
Wow.
And we also had this lovely dancer actor with frock coat and storytelling and everything, who was prancing around and sometimes would dance a rigodon or a courante. So it was extremely entertaining.
Wow. Really multimedia too, having the dance and the interesting visuals of the instruments, very visually appealing as well as musically. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was very appealing. And I think the audience was slightly flummoxed at the beginning, because the concert opened with the 4 of these players playing. Mm-hmm. And, no introduction at first. That came later, and all the explanations and everything about the instruments. But at first, I think people were thinking, what is this? Is this a joke? Is it meant to sound like that? Or what are those funny, raspy sounds? And so it's very funny. I think people were taken off guard. They weren't quite sure whether to giggle or to be shocked.
That's great, though. I mean, that is what art should be, right? It shouldn't be predictable. It should surprise and startle.
I so agree. And that's, of course, what the best composers do, don't they? They shock with their interrupt, whether it's an interrupted cadence or whether it's, just something unexpected. It's so much part of the rhetorical language, of course.
Yeah. And I mean, and genius isn't doing the same thing everyone else has done or is doing. It's doing something different. Exactly. That's what makes it genius. I want to double back a little bit because I'm so glad you talked about your book as a little girl, because I am very curious to know how you found your way to Baroque violin and Baroque music. I'm guessing that that's not how you started in music. Most people start on a modern instrument. Was it violin? And how did you find your way into this very particular style?
Yes, well, yes. So I learned the Suzuki method.
Oh,
I
okay.
started when I was about 5, and I was learning along with my brother, 2 years older. So we kind of have our sessions after school together every day. And my mother would, who actually plays the cello, she never became a professional musician, but she might well have been, because she was one of those amazing kind of multi-instrumentalist and singer kind of musicians, and she ran choirs and had all sorts of groups, and people would come around and have guitar lessons or cello lessons or recorder lessons, or it seemed like she could just about play everything. My father, also very musical. He was a choral scholar at King's College, Cambridge, as a boy, and then later on as a lay clerk, as a tenor. And they both still have very beautiful voices, still making lots of music.
Wow.
And so I grew up in that kind of environment. It was completely natural that my brother and I, Julian and I, would play instruments and sing. Mm-hmm. And since my father's in the church, we would often perform together as a family in services, not just on feast days, but just to try something out, or to make the service more beautiful, or something at the end when people were having their tea and coffee after. There'd always be something going on, and we kind of practiced it on the Saturday night. So Saturday night was not really party night for me ever. It was always
gig night.
which is fine. That came later, maybe. But we'd be looking at repertoire and saying, okay, let's put this. Dad would be planning, okay, let's put this chorale prelude in here and do that there. And so I was kind of in on all of that kind of programming from a very early age. It was just a part of life, kind of what you did. So that never really changed, because I'm still doing that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you kind of grow up with something like that, it doesn't become something that is, on the outside, external, or just on the outside of life that you need to step into. It's just so much part of you. It's like having an apprenticeship, like in the old days, how it would have been, I guess. And so I feel very fortunate that I had that kind of upbringing. Yeah. And I also sang in choirs. I sang a lot, actually. There was one point when I thought I might pursue singing rather than violin, just because it was very much part of my life, and it was very natural to me, and I was doing lots of concerts as well, and but somehow the violin won in the end.
Yeah. Wow, thank goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it was the right choice. You never know. Well. I still sing. But yeah, with all the kind of early music stuff. So early music, of course, was also very much part of my early life, just because it lent itself to our family, because the family of 4. So we'd often play trio sonatas, because Dad played keyboard, Mum played cello, Julian and I played violins. It's a given. Yeah. Trio sonatas, plenty of them. So I grew up with that repertoire rather than the kind of string quartet repertoire, which a lot of string players grew up with, especially violinists, of course. That kind of came later on when I was at college, really. And also I grew up with this kind of sense of church music, really, and polyphony, of course. And Bach is very much a big part of that, with the cantatas. So I was just very familiar with all of that, and it seemed very natural to then kind of embrace also the methods and the thinking behind it. Now, that was kind of very instinctive at first, but then I became more interested just when I was, in my teens, when I started to question things in a different way, the way you do. And I questioned my violin teacher, who was from the Russian school. And I used to ask him, when we were doing some solo Bach, I used to ask him about, okay, so why is this piece, why do you want me to start that with an up bow? Because isn't that an emphasis there? And don't I need to, show this figure and this gesture? So I had these ideas, and he, I remember him looking at me thinking, okay, so you've been infected by this early music.
Oh, gosh.
I didn't even know what that was at the time, because it just seemed very, just a natural thing to do, to want to find out, and
Mm-hmm.
to see where it came from. And what the actual musical language was of that particular piece, whether it was Wieniawski or Spohr, or whether it was Mozart or Bach or anything else.
Sure.
And then I just went along in that vein a little bit more, and possibly because he said, you've been infected. And I thought, okay. So what was this early music movement? So I started, digging a bit. And then we were living in Germany at the time because my mother is German. Oh. And I was also singing in a Lutheran church choir, so I was hearing a lot of Bach. And the music director there would often get the Staatstheater Opernorchester, which was the local kind of opera orchestra, to come along and support us and play along. And I remember thinking, okay, so this doesn't sound like Bach to me. This sounds like Brahms or Tchaikovsky, using a lot of sound, and because of course, it's a modern orchestra, lots of vibrato, and these kind of questions just crept in. And then I got to know Musica Antica Köln, found out Google, and started going to concerts. There was this lovely series in Kassel called Tage der Alten Musik, and so I started going to those, and I remember hearing all sorts of music that I've never heard before. Kind of Renaissance and also some medieval, but especially kind of the high Baroque pieces. And it wasn't just the actual repertoire, it's of course the way they were playing. So I remember plucking up the courage and going up after a concert and just kind of asking, a few really dumb questions, I would have thought. But you got to start somewhere, right?
Right, of course. No dumb questions. There is no such thing.
Reinhard Goebler was just so kind, just so sweet, and just pointed me in a few directions and gave me a CD.
Wow.
Well, actually, no, it was before CDs. What did he give me? He gave me a tape or something. This is a long time ago. Or maybe it was an LP. Sorry, I can't remember now. But he gave me some help, and I then took that to my violin lesson with my Russian teacher, and that was kind of the beginning of the end. It wasn't really his plan for me. He wanted me to go and do competitions and win prizes and stuff with modern repertoire, romantic repertoire, romantic concertos and things. And I wasn't particularly interested in following that kind of path.
Yeah.
I was more interested in making music in a kind of consort situation, chamber music, because I guess I'd done that a lot as a singer as well, and just in choirs, and it just was very natural, rather than being a kind of apart from a group, as a soloist, which can be really fun.
Sure.
It's just a very different mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're out there doing concerto. I was doing one the other day. I was doing a Mozart concerto, and you are kind of course, the soloist, because it's just kind of starting to happen at that time, isn't it? Because with Bach concertos, you're very much part of the texture, and you're kind of just part of the woven tapestry. You're just another voice, and you're in a way you're just part of enriching the whole language. But then with Mozart, you are already, there's a little bit of a diva thing coming in, especially when you're doing all your Eingänge and your cadenzas and things, and you can see how that then develops, and that's kind of already enough for me. But if you see what I mean, from the mentality point of view. But then going ahead and in time, and then doing, there's so much beautiful music, and it's amazing to delve into that repertoire. But to do that your whole life long, I already knew then instinctively that wasn't really the path for me to be playing Tchaikovsky.
So tell me about your most important tool of your trade. Tell me about your instruments, your actual violins.
Oh, yes. So I'm very lucky to have an Italian instrument from Genoa from 1739, made by Pasarini, who's not very well known at all, which was very much in my favor when I actually purchased it, because, of course, an unnamed, or not as well known instrument, of course, isn't as expensive.
Right.
So I was very lucky to find that. It took me a long time to find it. I'd been searching all over Europe or wherever I was on tour. I had a very nice instrument at the time, but it was a modern copy of a Strad made by Roland Ross, which is now in Australia. I sold it to a violinist who then moved to Australia. And it was a very beautiful instrument, very even sounding. But it didn't, I don't know, I just felt I needed more depth, more change in sound and character and color in order to just, well, especially for solo recitals. Sure. And I'd just been, at the time when I acquired the instrument, when I was looking for it, I'd just been asked to record the solo Bach sonatas and partitas. And I was thinking, okay, right, so I need to get my act together and actually find the instrument that I could envisage doing this on. And that's what led me to go on the search. So it did take a little bit of time. So I kept putting that recording off. And then finally I found the instrument. So, okay, go. Yeah. Red light on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know the difference between, a modern violin and a Baroque violin, what like the gut strings and the different bow and everything, could you kind of give a little quick explanation of the differences?
Yes, of course. So there are some quite important structural differences. One of those is inside the instrument, which is called the bass bar. So there's this piece of wood that runs underneath the bottom string of the instrument, on any string instrument. And in order to make the instrument more powerful, of course, that was then changed. Because with the changes of style and music, what I find so fascinating is that the changes of the tools and the instrument, of course, goes, and the bow, not to forget the bow, goes along with the change in musical style. So in order to project in larger places, so not just in a room at court or in a church or chapel, and then of course possibly a cathedral even. So you're now looking at a kind of salon or a kind of purpose-built concert room or hall, recital hall, and then bigger halls. So in order to project more, they needed to do something to make the instruments just louder. So that was one step, the bass bar. But another big structural difference is also the angle of the neck to the body. So if you look at a modern instrument, you'll see that the angle of the neck to the body is acute. It kind of comes down from the body. So you get more tension, of course, than on the strings. If you envisage the span of the strings from the scroll over to the bridge to the tailpiece. So on older instruments, they would have a different kind of tension because the neck comes straight out of the instrument, straight out of the body. And that was changed basically towards the end of the 18th century. That was changed. So it was a very exciting time where instrument makers and luthiers, they were experimenting. And I think it went very much hand in hand with players and with composers. Must have been so exciting. Just imagine, you go to your luthier. It's a bit like having your own tailor, right? You wouldn't get your dress fitted or your suit or whatever you needed. But you'd go and kind of see how this luthier might adjust your instrument so that you could play in a different way, so that you could make more sound, so you could be like everyone else who had all these newfangled things that were being developed. So I would love to have been a fly on the wall in one of those ateliers. Just imagine, so if we do that, I wonder what happens. It's a kind of just experimenting thing. And so those are kind of the biggest differences. And of course the bridge also changed. And the soundpost as well. So everything kind of had a little bit more substance to it in order just to project more. And then of course you have the strings as well, as you already mentioned, the gut strings. And I reckon at the beginning, in the 17th century and before, things weren't quite so refined because there wasn't the technology to produce the strings like we have today. Right. But we do know how they made them. I mean, they basically kind of hang the gut, sheep gut or cow gut from the ceiling, and to let it stretch. And then depending on the kind of string you'd want, get the kind of pieces twisted, or whichever gauge, whichever thickness you needed. And these days, it's such a refined practice, even though they do use the old techniques. You have lots of different ways of doing that. These days, they tend to bleach them just to change the color a little bit. Depending how purist you want to be. A lot of players have them unbleached as well. It doesn't seem to affect the sound quite so much. You can also have varnished strings as well if you're playing in a very high humidity area. Or in the summer, strings break very quickly. Of course, that is something that you just have to live with. You have to kind of put up with when you're a Baroque instrument fanatic. Well, other changes. Well, the bow, of course, changed its shape also towards the end of the 18th century, and it adopted the shape of basically what the way the modern bow looks like. This was done by someone called Tourte in France, but the earlier shape looks a little bit like the old Concorde,
Oh, right.
So it's got that very kind of sharp edge, kind of sliding, tapering towards the end. And so the weight is distributed towards the hand. So at the frog, that's where it's the heaviest. And that is not particularly heavy. It's much, much lighter than the modern bow. And then, of course, when you get to the tip, it's very, very light. So you have this lovely kind of natural, beautiful tapering sound when you draw the bow across the string, which gives you an immediate shape for the sound. Yeah, very different from a modern bow, where you can kind of keep the sound to the end, which is then, of course, much more adept to the kind of cantabile kind of style of playing that was then very much in favor at the time.
So what kind of projects do you have coming up? Anything in the works, either with Brecon Baroque or the festival or the ensemble, or with any other collaborators? Things we can look forward to?
Yes. Lots and lots in the pipeline, and lots has been going on. And actually, I must say, I feel very fortunate to have so many lovely musical connections with my colleagues and friends, and also promoters and festivals up and down the country, through lockdown as well. I mean, it was, of course, a huge shock to all of us, where just overnight everything was cancelled. Everything in the diary just said cancelled for about 2, 3, 4 months or so. But then at the same time, festivals were so inventive, and they did things like we're doing now, kind of conversations online, and just finding different ways to communicate to their audiences. So I did lots of kind of recitals from my living room, and chats, and the playlists, kind of favorite pieces, just kind of keep people going. They did some really lovely projects, and so they kind of kept most of us musicians going, really. So some of those collaborations have come to fruition, and so those recitals are then kind of now happening and will happen in the future. And some really nice new relationships have occurred through that, really, I must say, which might not have occurred before, you know.
Right.
So that there's been good things, there's always a silver lining, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I feel very lucky to have had those opportunities. And projects. So I've been, I've had the fortune of playing a Strad, which belongs to the collection at the Royal Academy of Music in London. They have the most incredible ancient instrument collection there, and they offered me to borrow the Strad, and so we had it set up as close to a kind of classical setup as we could get without interfering with the actual instrument. Because if you open up a Strat, you can imagine what happens.
Oh,
It would lose
yeah.
most of its value.
Right.
It's tight, right?
Right.
So that it's, it's in its modern setup, basically, with the neck and inside structurally. But it's got a kind of classical tailpiece and bridge and things and gut strings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a joy. It's very, very beautiful instrument. Mm-hmm. It has lots and lots of colors, and it just kind of wants to play the later repertoire. You can just kind of tell that it wants to do that.
When was that instrument made?
1718 it was made.
1718, wow. What are you going to be playing on that? But do tell me the name of the instrument.
So it's called Le Morin.
Oh.
So it has a nice name, like a lot of these beautiful Strats from the golden period. So 1718 is bang in the middle of this kind of golden period, which is amazing that they have that instrument. They have lots of other beautiful Strats, actually, along with their other amazing collection of Amatis and Guarneris and Gallianos.
Wow.
Really, really fortunate to be on the staff there, because then I luckily get to play some of these. I've also often borrowed different instruments from there when I've done, for instance, a project of all the Bieber mystery sonatas that, of course, are in different tunings. So you have to tune the instruments, in different kind of scordatura tunings. So you have different sonorities, which is incredibly evocative in itself. I mean, that's a big kind of different subject. I could talk to you about that for hours and hours.
Yeah. Next time.
In order to perform those pieces, that's very difficult to do on one instrument, of course, because, with the tuning changes, right? And so I've been very blessed to be able to borrow some of their instruments. And some of my colleagues, like my keyboard player, helps me carry all the instruments to the venues. It's quite difficult to get around. So repertoire on this Strat that we're doing. So I've been already made one CD, it hasn't come out yet, but of Beethoven sonatas with an Erard piano, which also belongs to the Royal Academy collection. They have a beautiful piano gallery there. And so we recorded one of them in lockdown, which was very exciting. So it was quite nice to use part of lockdown to kind of get into those. And we're going to be doing more of them, and there's quite a few concerts coming up too. And there was also a very, very nice project of Mozart fragment completions. And that came out quite recently, actually. I'm just thinking, if you wanted more information about that, and all the kind of the different pieces on there, if you wouldn't mind looking at the Channel Classics website.
Sure. Okay.
Because it'll be on there. But basically, what that was about, so Mozart left a whole load of fragments, ideas that he would jot down. The way we do shopping lists, I guess he was writing down ideas of, different themes, different things that had appeared to him overnight, possibly, or maybe he'd get up in the night and write them down. But there are hundreds of these apparently.
Wow!
And lots of them are for instruments, not just operas. We know about the opera kind of fragments and incomplete bits of arias and overtures and things, but sometimes there are like just maybe 15 bars, 20 bars, 30 bars of a tune with a violin and piano. Well, he doesn't always say violin and piano, but a lot of it looks like it would be. You can just tell from how he uses the staves and the figurations. Anyway, this amazing professor called Timothy Jones, who's a Mozart scholar, expert, and probably knows every note that Mozart composed. He had a little fun, and he basically just experimented with these fragments and completed them.
Wow.
And he did 4 different completions, and we recorded 2 of each movement just to show the listener. So it could have gone like this, or it could have gone like this.
Wow.
And it's just really, really interesting because he also pushes the boat out a little bit, because he's sometimes engaging with the thought, oh, Mozart could have gone there, or he might have done that.
Sure.
Which is, who could think in that way? I mean, I think it's really, really incredible. And it's very convincing.
I have been speaking on Zoom with acclaimed award-winning violinist Rachel Podger about Brecon Baroque Festival, its offshoot ensemble, and most importantly, her life and really amazing career as a Baroque violin player and teacher. Thank you so much. What a pleasure and an honor to speak with you.
Well, thank you for hearing me out with everything. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I can't wait to talk with you again. We have so much more we can talk about.
Absolutely.